In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. A whirlpool of light flew past Ethan's visor. He was plunging endlessly into the white void, suddenly very concerned that he didn't know how long this ride was supposed to last. After he had stepped into the portal, he had lost all sense of direction. Of course, that was because there wasn't any up or down in this interdimensional space. And then, all at once, the ground returned. It rushed up towards Ethan's feet. When the exosuit hit, the metal prongs on his boots compressed and absorbed most of the impact. It felt a bit weird and floaty as the armor righted itself. When he felt stable again, Ethan finally took a look around. He was on some sort of coast, the sky tinted reddish despite the sun hanging high overhead. The crystal blue water lapped up onto the sands just short of Ethan's feet. But aside from the sand and the water, there was nothing in sight, save for a rocky cliff face rising up into a mountain nearly out of sight. That and... what was that? It was the only man-made structure in sight, and aside from the water, the only splash of color on the landscape. It looked like a large red and orange disc, possibly miles wide, leaning against the mountain and cliffs like an enormous discarded frisbee. Ethan found a zoom function in the helmet and punched in closer. It was definitely some sort of structure, but it didn't look like it was supposed to be leaning as it was. The crooked disc was made of metal and had only a few windows here and there. And it looked like on the far side there were 8 giant funnel-like structures just peeking out into the sunshine. Engines. Ethan suddenly realized this was a gigantic ship, a spacecraft that had apparently crashed against the mountainside. Just as Ethan was getting his head around the idea of such a large ship, a warning flared inside his helmet. Recall activated, it said. Temporal tug initiated, another notice suddenly read. It didn't take long for Ethan to figure out what that meant. The people back at Simulator must have had some way to retrieve the suit. Ethan couldn't let them have it just yet. This was his only key to find the gargoyle. Ethan quickly flicked through the options in the software trying to cancel the order, but just like at Simulator HQ, something was fighting him off. As good as Ethan was, this thing was outperforming him. All he could hope to do was delay the process now. Well, that in the more direct means. Ethan quickly brought up a schematic for the suit. Temporal tug. Where was the system for temporal tug? Ethan was slightly curious as to the temporal part. Time? What did this system do with time? Surely not time travel, right? Ironically, there was no time to think about that. He just needed to find the source. There. Appropriately enough, right in the chest was the source of whatever system this was. Pausing only long enough to aim carefully, Ethan then ripped his gauntleted hand into the center plate of the suit. As soon as he found the core component, he ripped it out. The recall alert suddenly vanished, only to be replaced by dozens of new ones, but that was okay. The component Ethan had just ripped out was cooling. The round ring in the center, which had been glowing brightly a moment before, slowly dimmed. Just below the gaping hole in the center of the chest piece, a stream of water was leaking out. Huh, Ethan thought. That's weird. He looked back at some of the myriad reports that had popped up. Most were reporting damage or alerting him that the temporal tug was offline, but a couple were reporting a problem with the water cooling system. Great, I sprung a leak. Ethan quickly flipped around the options the suit displayed, looking for a solution. He selected the first thing he saw, a refill option. Ethan sidled into the sea beside him and selected the option. There were large tanks on the exosuit's arms, and these had little nozzles on the end. The nozzles on the right tank opened at Ethan's command, and he stuck them below the surface of the water. All at once, the tanks began refilling. They maintained a rate that matched perfectly with the leaking from the chest cavity. Ethan then relaxed a little as he dismissed the alerts more systematically now. He took the time to read through them, trying to get a handle on just how it worked. Then he noticed something funny. The water cooling system was a lot more complicated than it should have been. In fact, it was a lot more than a mere water cooling system at all. There was so much more. The water that was taken in by the tanks was mixed with something called a fluid modulator, and there were other systems in the suit that were labeled as relating to these fluid modulators. But these systems weren't connected to the tubes or pumps for the water cooling. Ethan looked closer. It looked like these systems controlled the fluid modulators themselves, but what exactly did that mean? It was time to start experimenting. Ethan activated one of the systems and started playing. Suddenly, he rocked to the side. He stumbled, trying to regain his balance. It was hard because he was already bent over to suck up the water around his legs. When he stabilized, he took the time to bring up a few schematics of the suit. There it was. One showed how the water was distributed through the suit, and it had shifted. Impossibly so. The water wasn't just flowing as it should be from the pumps. It was behaving very strangely, as if pulled to one side of the suit. An interesting idea occurred to Ethan, and he tried to play with the fluid modulators again. The suit shifted once more, but Ethan was ready, not just for the motion, but ready to keep an eye on the schematics. Yes, adjusting the fluid modulators meant he controlled where the water in his suit went. Ethan started experimenting with renewed vigor. The water, once in the system, once imbued with these fluid modulators, would obey whatever command he gave it. If that was true... Ethan commanded the water leaking from his suit to loop around in midair and return into it. Miraculously, it did just that. "Well, gee, couldn't they have told me about that sooner?" Ethan complained to no one in particular. Curious, he tried to locate the fluid modulators that had leaked out. Maybe he could reabsorb some of the water that had leaked into the ocean. Unfortunately, only a fraction returned. It seemed that when they dispersed enough, the fluid modulators became ineffective. They had to be dense enough to work. Ethan returned to the sand and tried to control the water that had leaked out before he made it over to the seawater. This too didn't respond to him. The water had been soaked up by the sand and the fluid modulators were useless to the sand itself. As Ethan continued to toy with this strange new discovery, he observed that the fluid modulators could not suspend water in the air unless it was moving. The water leaking from the suit had to loop around quickly before it could return. If he tried to make it float in a bubble in front of him, it would simply fall to the ground. Ethan didn't understand how it worked, and looking into the schematics of the devices in the suit didn't help. Even for him, this was complicated tech. Ethan had created a multidimensional communications node, a dark energy receptor, a gravitational field meter, and plenty of other strange devices, but this was completely alien to him. It might be literally alien, Ethan realized. After all, Simulator had access to other dimensions. An alert flickered in the visor. Dimensional rift detected. "Oh, come on, can't they give me a break?" Ethan asked as he deduced the source of the rift. "I just stole their suit, that's all." But even as he was complaining, he was looking over his options. There had to be a solution, especially with all of this water around here. Agents Red and Blue materialized a few feet away, running down the beach. "There he is," Agent Blue said, pointing towards Ethan in the green exosuit. Oddly, he was bent over, kneeling in the water. Ethan tried his new program, but the water merely spurted from the tanks on his legs. Some of the fluid modulators were lost at sea before he could recover them. He grunted in frustration as he rewrote the program in seconds. "Hold it!" Blue shouted towards him. Ethan needed more power and a better recovery. If he instead had the water flow like this... All at once, Ethan shot forward, a rooster tail of seawater sprang up behind him as his exosuit jetted through the water. It flew through the water like a jet ski, leaving Red and Blue in the dust. "Aw, man," Red moaned. "Since when could it do that?" "Stop complaining. He can't keep that up forever," Blue replied. "But now we have to run." Down the coast, Ethan was cruising along, struggling to maintain control. He had to hold his arms and legs in just the right position against the water battering into him. Plus, the program he had devised, while brilliant, was also complicated. He would take in a bunch of water at once through the nozzles. He actually had to override several safety features, and he was taking in more than could be conditioned with the fluid modulators. But that was the point. He would control about half of the water, the half that did receive the modulators, and the other would just be swept along. He carefully adjusted everything so that the unmodulated water was swept along but was moving just right so that it wouldn't siphon off too many of the precious modulators. Then, both the modulated and unmodulated water would shoot out the nozzles by his feet. The only trick after that was to reabsorb the fluid modulators and the water, while letting the unmodulated water fly out the back at high speed, pushing him forward. It was a real trick to keep the two types of water from mixing, and ultimately impossible to avoid any loss of the modulators. Still, Ethan kept the loss so low that it was hardly a problem. He shot forward like a rocket until Red and Blue were just pinpricks in the distance. Ethan shut down the system and tumbled through the waves for a second, right up until he planted his feet and pulled himself upright in a motion that almost looked impressive. Once the suit settled along with the water around him, and when he realized no applause was forthcoming, Ethan glanced around. He had covered a lot of ground. He was almost at the foot of the tilted spacecraft, and now that he looked around, he realized there were a couple of other structures here. 2 long box-like buildings, almost like truck trailers, were laid out in parallel a couple 100 feet away, and there were a few other gray boxes, maybe shoulder height, protruding from the ground. And there were people. They were wearing large overalls made of a strange material over bright orange shirts, also made of an unknown material. It didn't exactly shine, and it wasn't particularly thick or particularly thin. It looked hardy and not particularly comfortable. And yet, the group gawking at Ethan looked perfectly at ease in them. They looked perfectly at ease, that is, aside from their wide eyes looking out from under the wide-brimmed hats. Ethan walked forward and raised a hand. When he couldn't remember how to do that alien hand thing, he settled for a hang 10 sign as he greeted, "I come in peace, dudes." The 2 guys out front stared at each other in bewilderment. Then a third figure, a girl, popped out from over one of the boxes. "Hey, you lunkheads, you already had your lunch break, or are you saying you've hidden seconds and didn't tell me?" she demanded just before noticing the green exosuit walking back onto the beach. "Now that had better be delivery," she said, putting her hands on her hips. Bushy brown hair tumbled from under her hat, and she had to brush it out of her reddish eyes. Not like they were irritated, mind you, the irises themselves were red. And somehow, it wasn't weird or creepy. Maybe if she had pasty white skin like the other 2 guys, or even like Ethan actually, then maybe it would have been disturbing, as if she was some creature that had clawed its way out from a deep dank cave. But against her sun skin and the strange pinkish sky, they looked perfectly natural. Lovely, even. "Well?" she demanded of the strange suited man. "Well," Ethan said slowly, "I think my diner-to-door account was recently deleted, so I'm fresh out. But you tell me where the nearest burger joint and, say, hardware and computer store are, I might swing back and drop them off. Or I'll forget. Honestly, I got a lot on my mind." "Kelly," one of the men said, finding his voice, "we need to alert Commander Errol. It could be a threat." "Look, I already got a guy on my hit list and 2 guys with me on theirs. What do you say we skip the whole take me to your leader thing and I'll be sure to remember the burgers? How does that sound, Kathy?" "Kelly." "Kelly, that's what I said." "Well,
Ethan."
"Steven."
"Ethan."
"Steven, I've got a lot on my mind too. The nearest burger shop that serves hardware specials is currently being watched by that Commander Errol Davis here mentioned. And he's not as casual about security as the rest of us."
"Ugh, nothing around here is easy, is it?"
"I suppose that depends."
"On what?"
"On what you're comparing it to. How hard were things back in..." Kelly prompted.
"Aha! Not falling for that," Ethan said. "You want information, it's going to cost you. And it just so happens that I'm in need of some repair components."
"Yeah, that seems fair. Or, for a real laugh, we could trade information for information. And I think I have some that you really need right now."
"Oh, really? And what would that be?"
"That there's a portal opening to your left."
"Huh?"
Ethan turned and saw Kelly hadn't lied. A tunnel of light was already opened, and 2 figures were running out of it yet again.
"They just don't quit,"
Ethan complained loudly. "Hand over the suit and we will," Blue ordered, hitting the ground.
"Or don't and we can trash it," Red suggested.
"Of course, I imagine that with you in it, that would be less preferable."
"For you? I mean, it would leave Green with 1 less toy." "Okay, first," Ethan said, "I need this. I can't destroy the psycho robot that killed my family without it. And second, based on the games alone, Green is awesome." "That's it, he dies," Red declared, increasing the power on his blaster.
"Red," Blue warned, "this is your last chance. Hand over the suit and maybe we can help with this robot."
"And maybe you won't,"
Ethan replied, gritting his teeth. He knew how this worked.
"I can't take that chance."
"Good enough for me," Red said and fired. He was way too fast for Ethan. The large blast caught him in the shoulder, and the large green plate there shattered like brittle glass. Ethan belatedly dove to the side and anticipated pain to shoot through his shoulder, but none came. As he rolled, Ethan realized that while the damage looked really bad, the outer layer of armor had taken all of the damage, leaving the inner layer and Ethan himself unscathed. Before he could celebrate that, however, Blue began firing. There were more bolts firing from his blaster, but they weren't as powerful, deflecting off his armor easily. He looked back up, annoyed at the barrage, and saw Red and Blue separate. Red was dashing to Ethan's right, whereas Blue was going to his left. Ethan's hours in the simulator arcade quickly proved not to be entirely worthless as he recognized the tactic. By splitting, they were forcing him to pick a target. They had range. He didn't. Well, obvious choice, Ethan thought in the split second he had. He ducked and dove right just as another giant red blast flashed past. He tackled into Red and forced him to the ground. Then the sand was tinted blue as something hit Ethan in the back. The pack, the tank mounted to his back, burst. Blue's blaster couldn't have done that. Oh. Duh! Blue upped the power just like Red had. Red's blaster. Ethan grabbed the blaster from Red's hand and spun back to his feet. Even as his suit leaked, he must have been an impressive sight as he pointed the gun right at Blue. I mean, I'd say we're even now, but I have the suit, so what do you say we call it? Blue fired a shot, cutting Ethan off. He jumped in surprise within the suit, but the blue bolt flew right past him. "Ha! Missed me," he said, recovering himself. He pointed the blaster at Blue and it vanished. The white and red blaster vanished from his grasp. As Ethan processed this latest shock, he was hit from behind yet again. He spun, backing towards the square structures Kelly and the others were setting up. Red was standing, blaster back in his hand. That wasn't fair. Red and Blue took aim, and Ethan was sick of it. It finally clicked that the leaking water was the best way to level the playing field. He had already started unconsciously looping it around to keep from losing all the fluid modulators that he had left. Now it was time to innovate again. Ethan raised his arm, focusing the nozzles on the tank there, even as he dashed towards one of the smaller boxy structures. If this didn't work... Ethan shot some water from the nozzles, but the stream weakened halfway to Red, merely splashing him in the face. "Is this a game to you?" Red demanded, and water dribbled from his soaked hair down his face. Ethan barely made it behind the structure as Blue's blaster bolt blew apart the corner of the structure. "Considering you're from Simulator," Ethan shouted back. "Yeah, kind of." "Hey!" Kelly shouted from another blocky structure. "Watch your fire!" "Whoops," Blue said. "Apologies, ma'am. We're only here for..." A jet of water, much more intense than the first, shot straight into Blue's vest piece and shoved him off his feet. As the vest sparked, Blue groaned. "Just great," and then blasted himself. Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. "That's it," Red said, and blasted at Ethan again, running forwards. Ethan was blasted back as the corner he was peeking out from was destroyed. "What did I just say?" Kelly shouted. Red ignored her and twisted the dial on his blaster. Ethan had just gotten to his feet as Red fired much smaller bolts into the front wall of the gray block. As he leaped towards it, he cranked the power back up. Then, Ethan watched astonished as Red used the new holes he had just shot as footholds to quickly climb over the wall. As soon as his foot reached the top, he pushed off again, leaping into the air and taking his aim at the exosuit. Ethan had just enough presence of mind to raise both his hands and desperately try firing again. There had to be a way. A water jet cutter could cut through solid steel. Even with the damaged mech suit, Ethan should be able to do this. He fired, and one of the 4 jets flew straight through Red's heart. For a brief moment of total shock, Ethan watched Red's body hang in midair. And then it vanished. Ethan blinked. Mistake. He had lowered his hands without realizing it, so when Red reformed just as he had been a couple of seconds ago, Ethan wasn't ready to repeat his feat. Red's blaster bolt hit the visor around Ethan's head, shattering it. Ethan was still fine, but he was blinded. Just as his vision recovered, mostly due to the help of the digital display filtering out most of the brightness, Ethan saw a second blaster bolt shoot past his head from behind. "Drop it," Red said from right behind him. He was standing right behind the broken pack, at a now weakened point in the armor. A single blast from there would destroy him. "Get out of the suit," Red ordered. Ethan was indignant. How dare he try this from behind? That was something I would do. Ethan modified the flow of water leaking from behind and doused Red with a jet of such force that he was thrown into the big container trailer thing behind them. A blue bolt flew past him now, and Ethan realized Blue was back as well. He raised his arms defensively, automatically, and then the tank on his left arm exploded, showering water everywhere. Ethan stumbled aside, trying to find cover, running from the block that Red wore down, even as he realized Blue was probably aiming for the tanks. He was being clever, taking away his resources. That thought had just crossed his mind as Blue vaporized a chunk of sand just ahead of his path. Ethan stumbled, feeling trapped. "Can I blast him now?" Red asked. And Ethan saw him pointing a blaster right at him. There was no cover in sight that could save him, not this time. If he even twitches, Blue agreed. Now release the water. You jerks, Kelly shouted. We don't have another one of those. She hurled a wrench from the intact box straight towards Red. He held his hands up in a natural gesture of defense. Whoa, wait a minute, Blue cried. That was all the break Ethan needed. He ran straight for the far container. This is getting out of hand, Blue moaned. I just want to shoot at something green. Is that so much to ask? Red demanded of the vicinity. Go shoot somewhere else, Kelly yelled back. This is all I've got and you're blowing it to bits. You too, she shouted towards Ethan. They're the ones shooting, Ethan protested, but just then he had an idea. Actually, you know what? You're right, he said. Kelly was stopped mid-rage. I am? Yeah, of course. You're not involved with this. Hey, Red, Blue, or whatever you call yourselves, Ethan called. Red scowled. Blue answered. Ready to negotiate now? Not yet. I'd like to play out a few more rounds, but let's take it away from these people. What do you say we move the battleground? You hold off blowing me apart for a few seconds to do that, will ya? Deal, Blue said immediately. After all, he didn't want to put them in danger, and as a bonus, it was tactically advantageous to deprive him of his cover. Immediately, Ethan started walking out, carefully keeping his eyes on Red and Blue. Red detached from the little camp as well, and they all walked off to the side. And then Blue realized what Ethan was up to. Ah, crap! Blast him, Red! Finally! Ethan dived straight for the ocean as the two agents started lighting him up with red and blue bolts. Bits of armor shattered, but Ethan made it. He stopped caring about how many fluid modulators he had left. He just went crazy. A giant swirling shield of water engulfed him. As the blasts of energy struck the water, it boiled off, but the energy was diffused enough so that it didn't do any real damage. Ethan shot out another jet of water and struck Blue. He spun from the impact before vanishing and reappearing. It suddenly clicked with Ethan. The temporal tug that his own suit had been warning him about. These guys had the same thing. They were being pulled back in their own personal timelines. How long can you keep this up, I wonder? Ethan asked and fired his jets yet again. I don't need any more lives to take, Red started, and then both Red and Blue were struck, vanished, and didn't reappear. Ethan sighed with relief and allowed the water shield to collapse. He was impressed to see that he still had about half of his fluid modulators. Still, he had a tank shattered on his left arm, on his back, and he had armor damaged on his shoulder, a hole in his chest piece, the canopy over his head blown apart, and several other points of minor damage. The suit was leaking, and Ethan was a little surprised that it was still holding together. He needed this for revenge, he had declared. Well, I still have it, he thought bitterly. So, Kelly said from shore to Ethan's broken exosuit. I gave you some information. Your turn. Thanks a bundle, Ethan growled. A few more seconds heads up would have been appreciated. Couldn't do it, Kelly shrugged. The portal just opened when I said something. You were being real coy about it, though, Ethan pointed out. Because you were so straightforward, like with where you were from, Ethan sighed. Well, I'm from a planet called Earth. Ha ha. I was hoping for something more helpful. What? I don't know if there's an Earth in this dimension. First of all, you're standing on it, Kelly replied. Second of all, what do you mean dimension? This is Earth? Ethan asked, stunned. Who scorched the sky? Focus, Stephen, Kelly commanded. What was this about other dimensions? Can you help me repair my suit? Ethan countered. Probably not, Kelly admitted. I wasn't kidding about these blocks being the only ones they gave me. Resources are scarce, but I can get you to talk with someone who might be able to help you out. The only one on the planet, if you answer my question. Ethan sighed deeply. It's a long story. You mind helping me out of this suit? Sure thing, Kelly replied and waded into the water. Ethan was still standing, leaning over in the broken suit, which wasn't really in any shape to move. Kelly approached and reached over to either side of his face. Carefully taking hold of the helmet, she lifted it. For the first time, Ethan smelled the salty sea spray, and a second later, his eyes met Kelly's. Huh. Funny, Kelly said. What? Ethan asked, suddenly wondering if he had helmet hair. Aside from the eyes, you look like a spacer, she said. Ethan thought back to the other guys in the overalls who were now picking up the pieces from the battle. Aren't you a spacer? Ethan asked. Not if I can help it, Kelly laughed. Kelly Carpenter, she introduced.
Ethan Swanson, he replied.
Well, Ethan, why don't I show you around our spaceship?
This thing is enormous, Ethan said. He was following Kelly through the bowels of the giant city ship, fascinated at everything he saw. The place was packed with people, all wearing strange, brightly colored clothing. Some of it was similar materials to the work overalls Kelly and the others had been wearing, but a lot of it was of either a thin, papery cloth or a light, silky-looking fabric. But whatever they were wearing, most everyone had the same pale complexion and reddish eyes. Only a few, like Kelly, were the exception and looked like they had seen some sun.
Well, it was built to house all of us when we left Earth, Kelly explained.
They passed under the bright ring lights that were spaced above them every few feet. The halls were wide enough to feel like streets, and the ring lamps gave off a natural-looking light that added to the feeling. And yet, as Ethan had just noted, they didn't seem to offer the same health benefits as a natural sun.
Yeah, about that. You never really said what happened here, Ethan prompted as they continued climbing.
Of course, the most notable feature of all of this was that everything was tilted at an angle. It was clear that the inhabitants of this ship had taken great pains to adjust to life on Slant City, as Kelly had called it. The hallways had been turned into staircases. There were frequent bumpers outside of doors or down paths to slow anything or anyone who fell down. Everywhere Ethan looked, the inhabitants were doing their best to rotate objects and hatches and habitats to account for the new angle, but there was only so much that could be done.
It started a few decades before the Salvation Ships project. Something came from deep space and destroyed Venus. At first, the nations of Earth considered an attack on the entity, but it quickly became clear that it was far too large and powerful for our weapons to do anything. A while later, debris from Venus rained down on Earth, poisoning the atmosphere. Just as we were getting that sorted out, which was a Herculean task in and of itself, we realized that the entity was coming for Earth now. We had no hope of fighting it, so instead we had to flee. So the Salvation Ships were created.
Let me guess, Ethan interrupted. Big ol' spaceships to move Earth's population?
You got it, Kelly affirmed.
I noticed this one didn't quite make it, Ethan observed.
Yeah, Kelly sighed. The ethereal hawk here was the last to break atmosphere, and we were plenty clear of the planet when the entity arrived at Earth. And yet, that was apparently still too close. It didn't take more than a passing swipe at us as it left the planet, but that was enough. We had critical systems damage, especially in the engines. We weren't in immediate danger, but it was clear we wouldn't be going to the stars with everyone else. And there was only one planet that could support human life around here, so we turned back.
And you stuck the landing.
Yeah, something like that, Kelly grunted.
Well, that's kind of cool, Ethan said distractedly. What's it like living in Slant City?
I try not to, Kelly replied. It's crowded and ramshackle. I take every opportunity I can to get out there. Scouting, watching the weather, or today trying to set up an outside camp. Thing is, there's nothing out there.
On all of planet Earth?
Nothing. The entity stripped pretty much everything from the planet except the sea, sand, and rocks.
Weird.
Scary. We've only got so much supplies. The Salvation Ships were packed to the brim, but they were supposed to be in space. We're running through our reserves way too quickly. It's all the weathering.
I mean, aside from the weird sky, it looked pretty nice out.
Stick around. That's about to change.
But before Ethan could ask any more, they arrived before a set of large double doors.
Time to meet the leader, Kelly said.
Coolio, Ethan said nonchalantly. The doors swung open to reveal a round room ringed with a large version of the lamp seen in the hallway. 2 men sat in the room and were apparently arguing. They were both on seats which were connected to the floor at such an angle as to hold those within straight up and down, at least relative to gravity. It gave the sparse room a slightly ominous vibe. Kelly didn't take much notice of the argument, but instead stepped in, dragging Ethan with her. Administrator Cabot, I only promised you an opportunity for your pilot program. I believe I made it abundantly clear that I consider your full proposal a complete waste of time, the man in a padded uniform and gold icon where a breast pocket would be said.
Commander Errol, the man in the dark green silk outfit, all one piece it looked like, replied, You know as well as I that our people cannot continue to live in these conditions. We've made the best of it, but they need to see that there is hope for a future.
There will be no future if you continue to squander our limited resources on fruitless endeavors.
We will never overcome these challenges without taking risks.
Fascinating, Ethan interrupted. Immediately, both men stopped arguing and turned their gazes towards the newcomers.
Sorry for the interruption, Kelly said, quickly covering for Ethan. As you can see, we have a visitor.
A visitor? What could you possibly mean? Commander Errol asked.
Hey,
Ethan said, raising a hand casually. Ethan Swanson, genius, interdimensional traveler, exosuit pilot. Don't ask me where I got it.
Interdimensional traveler? Is this some sort of joke, Carpenter? Administrator Cabot demanded. No, I think it's for real, Kelly replied. But if you need some evidence, I bet this will give you a clue.
And Kelly held out the Ansible node. Hey, wait a minute, that's mine, Ethan protested.
Just borrowing it, Kelly shrugged as she handed it to Commander Errol. To him, he said, I think it's some sort of sensor. Whatever the case, it should at least give us an idea of whether or not he's telling the truth.
The commander studied the device for a while, then looked back up at Kelly. You're not thinking this man is related to our other visitor?
Only in that he might be a common enemy, Kelly replied. Ethan, you said you were after a psychotic robot?
I don't know, did I? Ethan said stubbornly. You stole my device thingy, and now you expect me to just work with you?
Does the robot you're after have 2-pointed wings, horns, a permanent smile, and look like a Dark Ages revival gone too far?
You've seen him, Ethan realized.
We really should talk, Kelly replied.
So then I picked a dimension that had some of the same trace readings that I had gotten off the gargoyle suit and hopped through. So now I'm here, Ethan concluded.
Incredible, Administrator Cabot said, trying to take it all in.
Well, it's no surprise that you detected evidence of the gargoyle being here, Commander Errol growled. He's given us far too many visits. Our fabricators are already running at maximum just to keep us afloat. We don't need him popping in to raid us.
But at least we now know why none of our patrols could find his base of operations, Administrator Cabot put in, sounding a little satisfied.
Of course, the commander grumbled. If he's from another dimension, we wouldn't. So he's been visiting you guys too, huh? Ethan asked.
Yeah, Kelly replied. He likes to raid us for important, complicated bits of tech. He's already taken enough vital components from one of our fabricators that we've had to take it completely offline. One of our recyclers is nearly shot as well. I've been on a lot of the patrols trying to find out where he's been hiding, in the vain hope that we could hunt him down. Of course, now it's clear that was all pointless.
So, does that mean we're on the same team or what? I'm getting sick of the back and forth, Ethan said.
Settle down, Stephen, Kelly shushed him.
That's not... Look, if you guys have the tech, do I get my suit repaired? Then I can go kick the gargoyle's butt.
I bet we could work out a trade, Kelly suggested. Even we haven't seen anything like that water control tech your suit has. We could really use something like that. You give us the know-how, we give you the materials.
I'm sorry, Miss Carpenter, that can't work, Commander Errol interrupted. We are far too low on supplies to hand them out to an unknown factor.
I have to agree, Kelly, Administrator Cabot added. We'll need those supplies if we are to ever expand our city beyond its current confines.
Not quite, Errol countered. There is another megastorm coming our way. We'll need everything we have to batten down the hatches and to reinforce our defenses. There is nothing that can be wasted with an expansion right now.
Commander Errol, be reasonable, the administrator pleaded. Our people are crammed together in inadequate quarters, living in makeshift beds and in constant fear of tumbling down the port side of the ship.
Ethan chuckled. Everyone glared at him. What? It's kind of a funny picture, he said, shrugging. Anyway, am I going to get a side quest for the repair of my armor, or am I supposed to leave now?
You truly don't appreciate our predicament, do you? The administrator said.
Kelly kicked Ethan in the shin and then put into the room,
Regardless of either of your plans, the gargoyle is going to stop them both. Unless we deal with him, it doesn't matter. The exosuit Ethan has might be our best bet. Let's invest a little to repair it, and then we won't have to worry about losing more to the gargoyle.
The administrator and commander exchanged glances.
Carpenter has a point, Cabot replied. It would be a very small fraction of our total supplies, and this could be quite the return on our investment.
Miss Carpenter, you've been hiding a silver tongue, the commander noted approvingly. However, I'm afraid that I have to disagree with your assessment. How was the suit damaged in the first place? In a fight with these two color-coordinated creeps who, think the suit belongs to them?
You're not seriously considering handing the suit over to those agents who destroyed our encampment, are you, Commander Errol? Cabot demanded.
Certainly not, the commander replied coolly. It's certainly no concern of mine what the proper ownership of the suit is. My point is that a couple of unarmored lunatics with blasters did significant damage to the suit. The gargoyle would surely make short work of it. To turn the suit into an effective weapon, we would have to rebuild the entire armor casing out of hardened materials, and those we certainly cannot afford to give away.
Oh, I like upgrade, Ethan said excitedly. Hang on, Commander, Kelly protested. We can at least try without the augmented suit. We could do just a simple repair.
I try not to do things in half measures, unless my hand is forced by the civilian sector, Commander Errol said, and before the administrator could speak up, he added, And I'm not budging on this one. This is a matter of defense, and I'm not giving out valuable material that can be used in more effective ways.
Oh,
Not to be rude, but why am I here then? Ethan asked.
Finally, the patience of the administrator and the commander reached their end. I don't know. What are you still doing here? Administrator Cabot shot back.
Getting kind of bored, Ethan answered. So I'm going to head out if that's cool. Please, Commander Errol said, even as Ethan was strolling back out of the door.
Here's another dead plate, Kelly said, and dropped the scrap metal onto the heap next to Ethan. If Ethan didn't know any better, he would have thought that Kelly meant for it to drop just inches from his head.
This looks like Swiss cheese, Ethan noted, barely glancing over from his welding and repairing of the green armor. Do you have anything useful to give me?
How about cables? Kelly shot back. I've got loads and loads of cables. This time she really did drop the cables on top of Ethan. She was a story above while Ethan was near the corner of the tall room. This way, most of the things she dropped from the recycler pile fell into a heap instead of sliding down the angled floor, except for these cables. These continued to drape and loop around Ethan, threatening to engulf him completely.
Whoa, hold on, Ethan protested.
What is your malfunction? Seriously? We're digging around in scrap that's bound for the recyclers instead of upgrading that suit, Kelly replied exasperatedly.
Well, they weren't going to give us anything back there, Ethan replied.
Sure, not at first, Kelly explained patiently, but we could have worked it.
I thought you agreed with them. Isn't that why you were setting up a camp outside? Ethan asked as he tried to detangle himself. The cables were quite heavy and durable despite their relatively small size, only a few inches in diameter.
Cabot is kidding himself if he thinks we can support a village out on the beach, not with the storms that come through here periodically. Personally, I was hoping those foundations could be used to mount defense cannons or something.
So you're saying we should have sided with Errol?
Errol is practical to the point of pig-headedness. He doesn't get that it's killing us living like this.
At an angle.
Well, yes. Why are you laughing?
I mean, it's goofy. You living at an angle is an odd predicament.
Why do I try?
Okay, I get it. But isn't, getting killed killing you more than living in Slant City?
Yes. Like I said, Errol is practical. He's right to prioritize defense. The problem is he discards everything else. We survive, so what else matters? He doesn't get that for people like me, we'd even go out on a mission we don't believe in, just to get out and try to see something new.
Ethan stopped for a moment while untangling himself. Have you tried video games? He asked.
You've got to be kidding me.
No, I'm serious. I know of this really great virtual reality system. If I ever get back to my home dimension, I bet I could snag some for you.
If you could travel between dimensions, I'd be asking for a lot more than fancy video games.
Good point, Ethan conceded. Man, I wish I would have realized the suit couldn't travel by itself when I took it.
It does have a recall function, Kelly pointed out.
Yeah, I don't feel like waltzing back into Simulator HQ now that I've stolen their prized suit. Especially not with it in this condition.
Afraid they'd scold you?
Now you're just pressing my buttons, Ethan noted.
I get your point, Kelly replied. Hey, I can't keep dumpster diving for much longer. Not that there's anything you'd find, really. Speaking of getting out, I'm on the team that's shoring up the sand below the port engine, and we gotta move out soon.
You have to go work on sand, Ethan asked skeptically.
You heard Errol. There's a storm coming. And with the Earth in tatters, these things are stronger than you can imagine. There's a gap that's formed under the engine, exposing part of the ship. Really fierce winds could get trapped under there, even rock the whole ship.
You're kidding.
Nope. Ship was designed to fly through atmosphere too, remember? It's not the most aerodynamic thing, but it can catch the air when it wants to. Obviously, it's not taking off or anything, but it'll start shaking bad enough to rip loose half of the things we've bolted together to keep us straight in here.
So, what are you going to do?
Make a big pile of sand, pack it down. Thrilling stuff, but it'll turn away the wind.
Ethan grunted, struggling with the cable still. Then, all at once, complained loudly, I really wish I could get that armor upgrade Errol was talking about. You don't suppose we could talk him into it, do you?
Not anymore. He probably hates you.
Why? Ethan asked, still struggling with the cords.
You're joking, right?
Kelly asked, poking her head over the ledge to the floor below.
What? I was just speaking my mind, Ethan replied. Why have brains if you're not going to say what's on them? Because then you don't get suit upgrades, dum-dum. Maybe we could have worked one of those two before, but now they both hate you.
I'll figure something out, Ethan replied dismissively, then stumbled, still struggling with the cords. What are these things made of?
Those were made to connect to asteroids, to haul them into the ship to mine for raw materials. You're not going to be breaking through them anytime soon. Oh, here, let me help. She finally conceded and slid down the ladder, which, like everything else, was angled compared to the floor. Slowly, she and Ethan started to unravel them, but it was meticulous work. Their own arms were at risk of tangling together in the process. But finally, Ethan was free, standing close to Kelly. He glanced back down at the cord. If I could use this for armor, the suit would be complete by now, Ethan grumbled. Yeah, we have plenty of it, Kelly noted. Not much use for it on Earth.
And you can't make me something from the recycler? Ethan asked yet again.
Kelly shook her head. It's one thing to steal scrap going in. It's another to reprogram it and take fresh stuff out. The end is guarded much more heavily. Too bad you couldn't just recall the simulator and steal some stuff from there.
I mean, I could, but I'd just get shot to pieces first. I bet anything they've got some sort of tracker on, or even a secret override in that thing. Ethan suddenly had a faraway look in his eyes.
What? What is it?
Kelly asked. A recall. A tug, Ethan breathed. That's it.
What are you talking about?
Come on, I have an idea, he said, and tried to run out of the room, but tripped on the cabling.
Care to share? Kelly asked.
Yes, Ethan moaned, face on the floor. I have an idea how to make both Cabot and Errol happy.
Now this I have to see.
Commander Errol, Kelly called, running up a slanted hall towards the small round courtyard where a dozen people were gathered.
You have to hear this.
What is it, Miss Carpenter? Commander Errol asked.
We have an idea.
I have an idea, Ethan interjected.
Ethan has an idea, and it's good. Hear him out. It could solve, well, not all our problems, but a lot of them.
I'm listening, the commander said patiently. Okay, Ethan began. I got this idea when I was thinking back to those red and blue guys. Every time they got hit, they just put themselves back together, just a couple of seconds in the past. I realized it was this temporal tug thing my suit had been warning me about. I hope this idea isn't some sort of time travel device. That has no chance of ending well, Commander Errol said in a tone that was usually reserved for addressing an over-imaginative child. Duh, of course not, Ethan scoffed. Temporal mechanics are notoriously tricky, even in the purely hypothetical, and the timescale is far too large to practically use what was designed for a couple of seconds.
Ethan, the point? Kelly prompted.
Huh? Oh yeah, they were purely inspiration. I was thinking of a tug, the way they pulled themselves back and repositioned. We can do something similar with the ethereal hawk. I'm afraid I'm still not following, Commander Errol confessed. Those foundation blocks Administrator Cabot installed, they dig deep into the earth, right? Yes, they're slightly modified spare landing gear. They're designed to be nearly immobile unless using the proper detachment procedure. And I hear that the storm's coming is so huge and so strong that it can even shake the ship. In the right conditions, yes, the ship is mildly aerodynamic, and with our position on the mountain, what if we could fix that? I'm sorry, fix what? The position on the mountain, Ethan said excitedly. We moved the entire ethereal hawk. That's ludicrous.
But think about it, sir, Kelly said. If we moved the ship, it would fix everything. We wouldn't have to worry about the storms because A, we could just bury the landing gear, B, we wouldn't be propped up on the mountain, and C, if all else fails, we can pile sand all around the edges of the ship. Even Administrator Cabot would be happy because we all wouldn't be so miserable at an angle. He could even build on top of the ship instead of out from it. Not to mention, Ethan added, all this, and he gestured into the makeshift steps on the ship, could be taken down and fed back into the recyclers. More material.
A compelling point, the commander conceded, but I can't see how this would be practical in the least.
Well, that's where I come in, Ethan bragged and pulled out his phone. Clicking on an app, he ran a simulation displaying his plan. You have tons and tons of unused super strength cabling. We run those through more of these foundation blocks and then we start digging.
Digging?
Yeah, we don't try to reinforce the Hawk, we actually start to dig it out. Then, when the storm comes, we let the wind sweep in underneath, actually pick up the ship a little bit, and pull it with the cables into a new position on the beach. It moves as easily as a puck on an air hockey table.
Pardon? Commander Errol asked.
Never mind, Kelly interrupted. The point is we've run the math 3 times. It all checks out. Ethan's developed a system of pulleys with these cables to make it all work.
This is interesting, Commander Errol said, examining the simulation carefully. Very interesting. But even if you're right, things could go wrong. There needs to be a backup. If something does go wrong, we need a way to fix it, to adapt to the situation. And that seems like it would mean someone on the outside. And certainly no one can be outside in a tempest like the one coming.
But I can, Ethan said, with the exosuit. It could shield me from the rain with its fluid modulators, and it's strong enough to withstand the wind. Or at least it will be.
With the upgrades, I imagine, Commander Errol said knowingly.
That's the deal, Ethan confirmed.
Well, it would have to be confirmed by Administrator Cabot.
Already talked to him, Kelly announced happily. The commander tried to scowl, but the beaming pride from Kelly and Ethan was infectious.
You devious schemers. All right, where's this exosuit?
A growing dark cloud began to poison the sky at the horizon. Each day, a little less of the light at sunrise reached Slant City. For a few minutes, then a few hours each day, the only light coming from over the sea were the flashes of violent lightning cracking the sky. Meanwhile, inside the mighty ethereal Hawk, the fabricators were hard at work, as were the recyclers, refurbishing and producing custom hardened metal parts. Huge machines casted the ultra-durable metal plating. The fabricators clanged and echoed loudly as superheated plasma shaped the pieces. Power was drained from non-essential systems as every enhancement was given to the armor. Coating after coating of protective and ablative treatments were added until the metal glistened oddly with the layers. Only then were they dipped in the hardy but ostentatious green paint. Kelly and Ethan stripped the skeleton of its old armor, tossing it aside and into the recyclers. The hardy and complex systems within them were then scoured for any sign of damage, and the two went to work. Welders and soldering guns lent their heat to the already blazing room, and here and there they forged new components that increased the speed and strength of the suit ever so slightly. Ethan carefully removed the remains of the temporal recall unit and installed a new, modified version. As he dug through all of the software, completely overhauling it to his personal liking, he also stripped it of any possibility of outside influence. At last, only 2 days before the storm, it was ready for assembly. Ethan downloaded the specifications. Kelly double-checked every motor, pump, and hydraulic, tuning it to perfection. And then they brought it to Commander Errol, who lowered each of the brand new armor plates and fastened it into place. Just before the new visor, made of a special transparent metal, was lowered onto the chassis, Kelly approached with the refurbished helmet. "Ready for a test run?" she asked. "Let's get on with it," Ethan replied with a lazy grin. "Yeah, sure," she said, rolling her eyes and lowering the helmet over his face. The OS booted up just as the visor was sealed in place. Status indicators flickered before Ethan's eyes. All systems were green, so to speak. Even the fluid modulators had been recharged, the suit itself slowly building them back up. Ethan flexed his fingers, and they moved easily. Everything moved with the slightest effort. "Oh yeah, now we're cooking," Ethan said. And then all of Slant City shook. "What was that? Did the storm come early?" Ethan demanded as his scanners all went to full power.
No, Commander Errol replied. It's our old friend.
Citizens of Tilt Town, or whatever you call yourselves, the gargoyle announced over the ship's own PA systems. We've danced this dance before, so let's not change the steps. Stay out of my way, and it will all be over soon.
Where is he? Ethan demanded of the commander.
On the roof, Ambassador Cabot replied, face strained. Be careful, Kelly said, even as she opened a hatch. Ethan didn't reply, but leapt straight up on the springy metal prongs on his feet. He flew up into the night air and saw the small crater the gargoyle had created when he had warped in. The crater had a small eye of undamaged metal in the middle, just around the exact landing spot of the gargoyle himself. He spotted Ethan immediately, and the eyes seemed to brighten malevolently. A new dance partner, oh-ho, the gargoyle said excitedly. What's your preference? Tango? Salsa? Foxtrot?
I'm more of a DDR guy at best, Ethan replied coldly. It may not be pretty, but it'll leave you gasping for breath, or preferably worse.
Do I detect the vintage of vengeance in that voice? The gargoyle said, anticipation increasing with every syllable. The desire for revenge aged to perfection. Yes, you do sound familiar. Go ahead, bore me with your specific sob story. I'll just warm up the engines.
And indeed, the hum of the engines on his back increased in pitch. Then I'll just have to make you listen, Ethan promised. And without waiting another second, without letting the gargoyle's rockets heat up any more, he launched himself forward. Ethan's chance to avenge his family is finally at hand, and he couldn't be more prepared. With a fully functional new armor suit, bolder and better than ever, surely it will be a match for the grievous gargoyle. Or will it? What trickery or techniques might the villain have up his metal sleeve? Find out next time on the Mirage Barrage.